July 12th, 2022. Welcome back to the Washington County Board of Commissioners work session. This is Chair Catherine Harrington, and right now online we have Commissioners Pam Trees, Nafisa Fye, Jerry Willie, and there he is, Roy Rogers as well, so a full complement. We'll pick back up with agenda topic number 5 on today's work session agenda. Ballot measure 109, supervised use of psilocybin, local options. I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Carr and the rest of the Washington County team.
Thank you, Chair Harrington. And I'm just going to introduce Senior Assistant County Counsel Rob Bovett, who will be making a presentation. Rob, go ahead, take it away.
Thanks, Tom. And I'm going to try this here. And Kevin, I may need your help, but we'll see if I can make this fly here. So screen 1, I think it's that one that I need. Did that work for everybody? Do you actually see something? Excellent. Okay. This is just a few slides I put together to kind of help walk us through what happened here with Measure 109. I think it's a much forgotten ballot measure. It actually passed a couple of years ago along with Measure 110, which got a whole lot more attention. And I think a lot of folks, including me, I have to admit, kind of forgot about it for a while. And so let's talk about this and some of the options that the board might consider moving forward. Let's see, I think I can push that. Oh, how do I advance? That's the question. Ah, there we go. I think I figured it out. So before I get started, this is just for Tom and I have to do a quick disclaimer. Psilocybin is still a Schedule I controlled substance federally, so it's still all a federal felony. And Tom and I are licensed attorneys in the state of Oregon. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, the bar has special rules. So do other professional licensures, which create challenges under Measure 109 that essentially prohibit us from promoting things that are federally a crime. And we amended the Oregon State Bar's rules about 5 or 6 years ago to help us out with cannabis so we can talk to you about the substance of cannabis. I can't really talk to you about whether or not psilocybin is a good thing or a bad thing or whatever. Tom and I are kind of somewhat restricted on that. You may be able to get more out of your planning department folks or your health department folks on that score. So I'm just going to be talking about really the structure of the measure itself, what it does, what it doesn't do, and what your options are. All right. It was approved back in November 3rd of 2020, a couple of years ago, just right before COVID hit. Pretty overwhelmingly, 56-44 across statewide. Here in Washington County, if you're interested, it was 59-41. So we passed it by an even larger margin than passed statewide. The cool thing, I guess, from my perspective, whether you consider it cool or not, it is up to you, is that the person who wrote it, Dave Kopelak, was a business lawyer in Portland. He basically just parroted the bulk of the rewritten marijuana laws from 2015. So he borrowed essentially ORS Chapter 475C, which was based itself on the Oregon Liquor Control Act of 1933. So a lot of this is actually very familiar in terms of a regulatory structure in state law. But there are some important differences, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time highlighting those differences because those are kind of important because this program does run differently. And I should also add, unlike cannabis, where we were the first state to decriminalize user amounts of marijuana in 1973. We were the second state in the nation to allow for medical marijuana in 1998. We were the third state in the nation to allow for recreational marijuana in 2015. We're the first state out of the gate on this. Nobody else has done this. So we're kind of inventing the wheel. And that does create some implications that I'll talk about here in a minute as well. But the good news is the actual structure of the measure is pretty simple and easy to understand for practitioners that have engaged in practice with OLCC, with cannabis, or even with liquor. Very familiar situation. So let's just talk about the basics. We're talking about psilocybin, which is a psychedelic drug derived from fungi, particular mushrooms in particular. And the state has chosen, and the act kind of directs the choosing of a particular subspecies, which has been done. In terms of how the measure itself was structured, it gave OHA 2 years to adopt rules necessary to run the program. It established a Psilocybin Advisory Board, better known as the PAB. They've been conducting meetings and hearings for, gosh, a year and a half now. There was an attempt by Dave Kopelak in the crafting of it to parrot our attempts to stay out of federal trouble. I think he did as good a job as he could with the statutes, because what we don't have, and I'll talk about it more in a minute, is we don't really have any guidance from the U.S. Department of Justice, from the U.S. Attorney's Office, like we had with cannabis. And that poses an additional challenge for us as regulators. Tracking in terms of sales of the products, very similar to cannabis, not much more to add there. There is no local taxation of psilocybin products allowed, unlike cannabis. There's a 15% flat tax on the sale of psilocybin products at psilocybin service centers, and I'll talk about that in a minute. In terms of crimes, it's basically the same exemption from state criminal law that exists for cannabis. Essentially, if folks comply with Oregon law, they become exempt from the operation of Oregon laws that criminalize psilocybin. Preemption, there's a preemption clause very similar to the cannabis preemption clause. I don't want to say too much about that because it's kind of sloppily written, and I don't want to essentially tell the state how to write a better one. Licenses, there's no local licensing involved here. I think that's a lesson that was learned from the cannabis industry. Some practitioners got pretty upset with additional licenses at a local level, so that was written out of the measure. In terms of the use, this is a big difference that's really important to highlight for you between cannabis and psilocybin. This is not a situation where we're going to license retail shops where folks 21 and older can go purchase a psilocybin product, take it home, and have an experience. This is supervised use of psilocybin, so you can't go buy something and take it home. This is designed really by the chief petitioners with the help of Dave Kopelak to really facilitate a therapeutic value and therapeutic use of psilocybin, and not necessarily a recreational take home and experience it. And we'll talk more about psilocybin service centers, because that's really key for your policy option choices here in a moment. It has to be under a facilitator's supervision. Those folks have to be licensed as well. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then there's a hotline for locals to verify whether or not the psilocybin business is legit or not, just like we have for cannabis. Let's talk about the licensees. There's less licensees in terms of the number of them that we have with cannabis. And really the only two that I'd like you to focus on for local option purposes, because that's where all of your local options are really in the manufacturers and the psilocybin service centers. The psilocybin service centers are where people go to purchase the product and experience the use of the product under facilitators' supervision. Those are the two I'd like to focus in on. Those are what we kind of used to call plant touching businesses in the cannabis sector. This is fungi, it's totally different, but you get the idea. Psilocybin service centers have a number of rules around them baked into the statute, but they defer really most of the design of what they can and can't be, and how they can and can't operate, what times, what they have to do to accept patients, what they have to do to release people that have experienced the use. That's all largely left up to OHA to develop in rules, essentially the programmatic rules. Manufacturers, lots of twists and turns around this as well. I guess I should say that for both manufacturers and psilocybin service centers, those can be under certain circumstances combined into a single location. I've heard proposals ranging from, oh, let's just have a psilocybin service center be a therapist chair, all the way up to a destination resort and agricultural lands that is full service. So really the range of possibilities for the PSCs, the psilocybin service centers, is really broad, and it's really left up to OHA to define what will be allowed and what won't be allowed. In terms of local options, let's just dive into what the measure provides, because it basically provides the same thing that cannabis provides in terms of your basic options. The first couple are pretty straightforward. Land use, of course, depending on, for example, how the psilocybin service centers are allowed to operate under rules. We may or may not need to amend our land use planning code to allow these in certain areas or prohibit them in other areas. These are kind of shall we say, a unique creature, because it's not a retail shop. It's not really a clinic. It's kind of its own thing to be defined by OHA. We also have the ability to enact time, place, and manner regulations, which we have the authority with cannabis as well. This is largely to fill out all of the holes and gaps that might occur in the OHA rules programmatically. So for example, if OHA doesn't adequately address X, Y, or Z, we can fill in those gaps, whether it be public health, your Health and Human Services Department. As you all know, you are the county public health authority. So we need to have our public health folks make sure that there's a public health safety around this. We also have public safety concerns. Your sheriff's office has been looking at this and wants to make sure that we don't have people driving impaired, for example. So we'll have those kind of things to look at. It could be the OHA rules cover some of that. They might not cover other aspects of it. And then of course, in land use and transportation, we also have the ability to do time, place, and manner regulations as well to deal with siting issues, operation issues, and all of that. And that's the way cannabis worked as well. It kind of is a staggered thing. You start with the statutes, you go down to the administrative rules, and then you get to all the local siting and time, place, and manner regulations. Same basic structure. We have the same options here with regard to land use and time, place, and manner regulations. We also have the ability to opt out of having these businesses located in unincorporated areas of Washington County, just like cannabis. However, it has the same restrictions that cannabis has. You have to refer any opt-out ballot measure to the people for approval at the next general election. And the next one would be this November. So each November of even numbered years is a qualifying general election. So I fully anticipate there will be a slew of opt-out measures in various parts of Oregon this November, kind of like we saw with cannabis in November of 2016, if I remember my dates correctly. I fully expect many of the counties and cities and areas that voted against the measure to have this ballot measure on. I didn't really initially anticipate talking to you about this option too much, but we've run into a wrinkle. And the wrinkle is this. The Oregon Health Authority won't begin their rulemaking process related to psilocybin service centers or psilocybin manufacturers until September of this year, and try to have them in place by the end of this calendar year. The struggle with that is that January 1 or January 2nd or 3rd, whatever that first Monday is in January, people could start to apply for these licenses to the state. So we have concerns that we really won't have time to present you with time, place, and manner regulations, anything we need to supplement, any land use changes we might need, either from the Health and Human Services Department, from LUT, or even potentially the SO, depending on what the OHA rules are. We don't even have draft OHA rules yet. So it's really hard for us to even begin drafting or begin analyzing those things. So I will also let you know that the law does have a provision in it. I've given you the site there. Although you need a vote to sustain any temporary or long-term opt-out, you don't actually need a vote of the people to repeal that. The board can just repeal and any moratorium or ban literally at any time the board wants to. That's a facet of a bill I worked in 2016 for Deschutes County and got baked into, no pun intended, baked into the cannabis statutes. And that flowed over into the psilocybin statutes as well. So theoretically, if you decided to submit an opt-out measure, either temporary or a longer term, to the voters of Washington County for the unincorporated area, and they approved it, if theoretically then OHA got their rules in place and we had time and developed our rules and you were satisfied everything was really in good shape, public health-wise, public safety-wise, then you could essentially just repeal your opt-out. So those are all the slate of options that are baked into the statute. From my perspective, really kind of have, and there might be more, but off the top of my head, I can think of about 3 options. Really, one is to kind of just wait and see and do nothing right here and see where the OHA rules go. There is some potential risk there if we get the OHA rules late and then people come in with applications and we don't have our rules in place. We may have a challenging situation to some extent. So there's some risk to all of these, of course. Another option would be to submit a temporary moratorium to the voters to see if they would approve that. So we can see where the OHA rules go, and then we can do our local rules as well. And then a third option would be to just do a referral to the voters for an opt-out that has no end date, although you can repeal that anytime too. I have checked around with other counties and cities outside of Metro and then also in Metro. I haven't heard from Multnomah County what they intend to do yet. I think they're still pondering things. I did hear from Clackamas County. I think their board's going to be presented with what I would call options 2 and 3, which is either a temporary or a long-term moratorium or ban. I'm presenting you all 3 of these options because there's the ones I can think of. I'm sure there's more of those. Those are the ones I can think of. I will tell you that I have drafted or crafted for your consideration all the necessary documents for option 2, which would be a temporary moratorium referral to the voters. And those are all attached to your packet, including a potential draft ordinance 888, as well as a resolution in order to put that on the ballot with a ballot title. But that's easily changeable to either of the other options should you choose to go either direction. If you choose to do wait and see, then obviously I don't have to write anything. If you choose to make it an open-ended moratorium that you're asking voters to support, then I would just tweak the documents that you see. So with that, that's really my kind of overall kind of quick summary of things. And I will try to stop share here and get you back to your normal screen. Hopefully that worked. All right, happy to answer any questions, take comments and what have you. And looks like Tom's already got something he wants to add.
Perfect. Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you, Chair. I did want to note that the timeline we are on is very tight. That to put this on the ballot, the last meeting that you have is August 6th. So we will not have time for engrossment. So if the commission wants to change something from what Rob has presented, we'll need to know that today to be able to present it as engrossed, so we won't have to do an amendment. Rob, is that correct?
Actually, I think by the way we charted it out, technically we can actually do one engrossment the way it all charts out. But I will tell you that that's squeezing things out. That's squeezing the last day out.
So if we engross at the first reading?
Yes, if we get a direction to do that, then we can schedule it for essentially the engrossment will occur on the second, the third reading, what would have been the third reading. So it's technically possible, but Tom is correct in the sense that the sooner I get your direction and know what to draft for you, the better.
Yeah, because we have business meeting on August 2nd. I'm not sure we have it on the 9th. We do not have a business meeting on the 16th. So then that takes us to the evening of the 23rd. So go ahead, Commissioner Treese. Thanks for kicking us off.
Rob, I believe you mentioned to me, and I'm not sure you mentioned it here, when the measure was voted on in Washington County, how much did it pass by?
Passed by 59 to 41, so it was even a greater margin than a statewide. So that's an 18-point spread, which is, I mean, county clerks will call it a landslide, which is a pretty wide margin.
Yeah, and my only, as I listen to the problems associated with that, my pragmatic self understands that, but at the same time, frankly, I'm influenced by the vote in Washington County on this issue. So but I'm anxious to hear what the discussion is with my fellow commissioners here.
And what you said reminded me that I forgot to talk about the U.S. Attorney's Office, because it's not just us that is waiting for it's not just cities and counties that are waiting for the OHA rules to tell us what PSCs will be and not be. The U.S. Attorney's Office is also waiting. So the League of Oregon Cities did ask the acting U.S. Attorney to issue the equivalent of a Cole memo, and I can explain what that means, but basically that's guidance from the U.S. Attorney about what they will and won't prosecute and how to look at all this. And the U.S. Attorney's Office basically said, we're not going to issue any guidance. We're not going to give you any position on any of this stuff until we can see the OHA rules. So they're not going to tell us yes or no about anything as well. So there's that hang up as well. And I guess I'd say the importance of that is when we had the Cole memo, and I won't get into all of that, but that was basically the US government saying what they will and won't prosecute in terms of people complying with their own state's cannabis laws and the federal priorities. There were 8 of them at the time. That is the document we actually used to craft Oregon law. That's the document that we used to design the regulatory program. So we're kind of hopeful that if they issue a Cole memo or something like it, it will look something similar to the Cole memo, because as I mentioned, Measure 109 was crafted based upon Oregon cannabis laws, which were based upon the Cole memo. But we don't have anything in hand. We don't have any promises from the US attorney that they will and won't prosecute this or that.
Go ahead, Commissioner Willie.
Yeah, again, thanks for that presentation. When I got briefed on this last week, the 3 options were do nothing, a 2-year delay, and a permanent ban. I thought I heard you say do nothing, a temporary delay, and an open-ended moratorium. So did I misunderstand the options you gave us versus what I understood them to be previously?
No, I don't think so. Actually, it's probably just me and my lingo. Those are actually synonymous. So I would say those 3 options that you just described are the same 3 options that I just described. One is wait and see and or do nothing. The other is what I would call a short-term moratorium. 2 years is what I have crafted in your draft. I do that because that's the 2-year general cycle, and that would give you 2 years. And then 3rd option, you can call it permanent, but I mean, permanent is permanent because you can repeal it at any moment. So, but it would be open-ended. It would last until you decided to repeal.
See, well, it's interesting to me that we are in the process of investing $75 or $80 million on a center for addiction to do everything we can to help those that have alcohol and drug addictions. And then we deal with a legislature that approves the use of these, and you can say, okay, it's going to be in a secure environment, but it's basically, I thought when I originally saw this, that they were using it, the passage of this, under the guise of it would help mental health, people who had mental health issues. So it had a health aspect of it. That was the driver. So but it appears that we're just trying to understand where we can cite these. And as I read something real quickly in your notes, can't be more than 1,000 feet apart, less than 1,000 feet apart. But again, we're citing these locations. They haven't exactly defined what those sites look like, if it's a one room with a chair or exotic, but I feel like the voters didn't fully understand what this issue was and what we were allowing, and it does not appear to have much to do with mental health. So am I wrong in that, Rob?
So that gets me into dangerous territory, but I don't want to cross over advising things that would cause the bar to come after me. But I think you're largely correct, Commissioner, in the sense that the folks that I talked to very early on, the 2 chief petitioners, they were a couple, a married couple, both psychotherapists, and that was their motivation, which was to allow for psilocybin to be used, but not in what some in what is now the burgeoning industry are calling the medical model, because that's not what Measure 109 establishes. It doesn't establish a medical clinic. And in fact, it specifically says these don't have to be licensed as a medical clinic. So it's kind of it's got that in the background, but that's not how the measure is written. It's not written to be a health facility.
So basically, I could go if we didn't do anything, if we choose option one, I could walk in on the first Monday in January as an individual resident, apply for one of these, didn't have to be licensed. I don't have to be have any kind of a medical background, and provide this service. Is that correct?
Well, and that is a great question, Commissioner. It's a hard one to answer because for me to answer that question, I would need to know what's in the OHA rule. So I can't really answer the question.
Okay.
And that's the struggle. I mean, in a nutshell, that's the struggle.
Well, and I'm not, I'm obviously not trying to put you or the county at risk here by you giving legal advice and all of those kinds of things, but I'm in favor of option 3 myself, because I just don't feel like I feel like we're being conflicted with our own values. So we're going to move ahead and approve these when let's just kick it over to the voters and let's make sure that they understand clearly what it is that they're approving, and then I guess let the chips fall. But again, I just find it very difficult that we're spending millions and millions of dollars on trying to help folks not be addicted, and then we're providing all these things to become addicted. We've decriminalized drugs. Now we've got mushrooms. I don't know where the legislature is going on this, but I'm certainly going to advocate for an option 3. So thank you.
Commissioner Rogers or Commissioner Fye, do you have any questions or any information you would like to contribute at this juncture?
Just a comment. I was listening to a program. They were talking about this very subject, and I think that Commissioner Willey's comments were along the lines that they were chatting with, that there is definitely a concern about the amount of mental health and money we have and how much we can really spend for addiction services. And did the public really understand? I think to Pam's point earlier, she was saying, well, let's look at what the public did. And I always tend to go that way as well. I always say, well, what did the public vote on? But I'm not certain it was really that clear to everybody in mind. I don't think they really had a very comprehensive view. If they did, then fine. But I'm tempted to not try to put some moratorium on it. I think that makes sense to me. I'd like to hear what the rest of you say, but that seems to be a sensible thing to do.
Rob Avila. I'm trying to figure out, I have a lot of questions about this. I apologize. And they're all over. First question online, especially hearing Commissioner Willey and both Rogers. Is this addictive?
So could I interrupt for a moment? Rob's already told us that he's somewhat limited in what he and Tom can provide us informationally. Secondly, Rob and Tom, so the voters have approved this topic. Isn't our job as a county government to take whatever rules are implemented at the state level or adopted, and for us to implement that here in our community? What I'm trying to get at is the voters have provided direction. I haven't read anything in the act that says beyond going forward with a permanent opt-out for now, that it's our job to question the result of the voters. So I know there are some sideboards in terms of what you can answer or not. And I'm also concerned that we're here at 1:30 already relative to our posted agenda. And if there are a lot of questions, then perhaps we're going to have to pause this conversation so that commissioners that need a briefing can get a briefing and come back to this at a future meeting. So
I'll reframe to ask differently, Rob, in a way. As the Public Health Authority Board, is this addictive?
So, although, let me see if I can answer this safely. So, okay, well, let me just say this. I teach drug policy at law school, and that's what I do. And so I study drug policy data all the time. And I just, in fact, processed the last year's admissions data for drug treatment. And I can say that very few people, if any, go into treatment for psilocybin. Treatment is overwhelmingly provided to opioids now, actually eclipses alcohol for the first time in a long time. So fentanyl and meth are driving people into treatment pretty massively. I can't really speak intelligently to what the future of psilocybin might look like. I don't think it's intended to be something you can go purchase and then use and use and use. It's more of an experiential type drug. But if I talk much more about it, I feel like I'm getting into nervous places.
Yeah, I realized Tanya is unmuted. Go ahead,
Commissioner Fye, staff are collecting these questions, and if commissioners have additional questions, we can follow up in writing in a Q&A style so that all commissioners have that information. Because appropriate staff that should be here answering some of this is our behavioral health staff within public health.
And I couldn't agree with that more, and especially if their licensure doesn't put them into potential risk for talking openly about this.
and what that means is today is just an opportunity to provide initial direction, right? Do nothing. So that's that. Temporary ban or permanent opt-out ban, right? Those last two go to putting it on the ballot. We don't have to decide that today, right? That'll come to us at a business meeting. So there is time for briefings and additional Q&A. Does that help? Sorry, my window's changed.
Sorry, Rob, were you going to say something? I was going to respond to Chair Harrington.
No, I was just going to say that we've charted, as you can see in the staff memo that you received from the three directors, we kind of charted out a rough schedule, and you can see there would be a public hearing in there. There would be a first reading, a second reading. So yeah, there is, even though the time is somewhat compressed, but that's mostly because of the summer and vacations and various other things. So we still have plenty of time to do staff briefings for y'all.
And I think I like what Tanya said. It isn't so much of commissioner questions being answered in a briefing. It's sort of like providing the public these opportunity to also, because these are not questions that were coming up. These are questions we're hearing from constituents. So it's really important that, so I appreciate, Tanya, what you said around the one pager about these questions. And I think I realized that maybe halfway, Rob, probably the public health person should have been weighing in on this rather than you. I see a lot of hands up, Chair Harrington, so I'll be brief on the last questions. And I do appreciate what you said, Chair Harrington. I think it helped me to sort of say, okay, today isn't the decision making, it's not a set. So I feel comfortable to weigh in on later. I'm trying to understand engrossed versus weighting the OHA rulemaking and how they fit in together, or is there any alignment? And also, if that's a long-winded question to answer, I can wait as well.
No, I think that's pretty straightforward. So any engrossment would actually occur before OHA even begins the rulemaking process, because the rulemaking process, they're tentatively planning to start this September. So the deadline to actually put anything on the November ballot is actually in early September. But if you back off the additional time that our elections division needs to process, that's what gets you to August. So by the time we get to you having to make a decision as a board among those three options, unless something changes, it will still be well before the rules are even, before they even start.
Commissioner Fai, I can't tell if you have more questions or not.
No, I'll let Stephen go next.
So Stephen, are you trying to answer a question, or will I ever get a turn to ask questions?
No, feel free. I just wanted to maybe just offer some thoughts just to maybe try to help bring things to a close today. So, but would you like to go ahead first, Chair?
You got the mic already. Go for it.
Okay, thank you. I do think that the approach that we're suggesting of a temporary moratorium essentially makes a lot of sense. I think we don't want to subvert the will of the voters. We want to have the opportunity to develop thoughtful regulations around these new uses that we haven't seen and experienced before, making sure that if there are public health considerations that can be addressed, that we can address those, that we can involve our community in those discussions as we develop those regulations. And so, and one risk I think potentially Teresa pointed out, if we were to put forward a permanent ban and it goes down, if you will, the voters don't approve it, then we may lose the opportunity that we're suggesting that we take to try to develop those thoughtful regulations by implementing a short-term moratorium. So just wanted to leave you with those thoughts.
Okay, I have a few questions. On slide 9, local options, land use, time, place, manner, opt out. On that slide, it's a bullet list related to manufacturers. So it talks about this product being a crop. And then that's allowed in the rural areas with exceptions, blah, blah, blah. Then the last bullet says a county may allow the manufacturer as farm use. That feels a little bit in conflict to me with everything that's in the above part.
And yes, and I would probably defer to Stephen and maybe Teresa, but my short answer is that was just my cryptic note that Measure 109 includes the same provision that we crafted for cannabis to allow it to be treated by counties as a rural farm use in agricultural zones. So essentially treating it as potentially a full crop. That impacts things like the right to farm, the Farm Bill, a variety of things that impact it. But I see Teresa popped in and she's our expert on it. So I'm gonna stop talking right now.
I'll just note on that one, I think this was a cryptic shortening of the longer portion of that section. And I remember look that section up. This says that in certain non-resource districts outside of the UGB, that it could be considered a farm use there, but it definitely is considered a farm use for our resource districts. So EFU, AF20, ESC, but for those others like rural residential, AF10 and 5, those we could consider it, but that's a choice.
Thank you. So I had 2 questions and a comment. The first question you've already addressed in confirming that we have a role for implementation of what the voters have approved, whether it be out in the rural areas with regard to growing this crop, potentially manufacture, and then the urban unincorporated areas for citing these PSCs, psilocybin service centers. Got it. Then So what I'm pretty clear about is 82% of the acreage in Washington County is rural acreage. It's like over 300,000 acres. It's a lot. Then for the urban unincorporated areas, it's 28,000 acres or 6%, which is about half of what the cities have. And I checked in with local mayors at the last chair mayors meetings, and some of them are just like, well, you know, these service centers are going to happen and OHA is going to do the rules and we'll implement per the rules. What I don't know, since these service centers can't be in a primary residence, what in terms of the overall siting in the UUA that might involve. I mean, long and short of it, once OHA has the rules out and once we're able to quantify how many areas are outside of residentially zoned areas, we may be talking about some pretty specific areas. So in the future, when we know more post the rules, may not seem so as scary as the current unknown, right? So bottom line for me, irrespective of how known and unknown it is, it's a change in our community. And I'm interested in ensuring that our residents, whether they live in rural or have operations in rural areas or in the urban unincorporated areas, that they have a way to exercise their voice in terms of locational concerns, okay? We may not be able to do anything about their concerns, right? Because the measure is requiring certain things, and OHA and the Department of Land Use at the state will be telling us what we need to do as a local community. And we're going to have to do it, right? But nonetheless, everybody has a lot to learn, and we have a role to help our community members know what this means for properties that they own in our community. So really, that's my interest, not in a long-term ban, but in the temporary nature. And as I understand it, you're proposing for that temporary aspect for at most a 2-year standpoint. So I thank you. I know that I asked Mr. Carr about this a few different weeks ago. And I'm at this juncture, given that there's some knowns and some unknowns, I'm interested in at least pursuing that temporary 2-year opt-out. So I just wanted to share those thoughts for now. How does that compare with your option 3, Commissioner Willie? I don't remember what number 3 was. And then Commissioner Treese has something more too.
Well, number 3 was basically an open-ended ban. So, I appreciate what Stephen just said a few minutes ago, that we go out to the voters with a number 3 option and they say no, we're back to number 1. And that's to me, that's the worst place we want to be. So, so I'd probably lean towards your recommendation as well, Chair, a 2-year delay. I mean, the voters 59-41, whether they knew it or not, I guess it's our job to implement what the voters have approved.
Thank you, Commissioner Willie. Commissioner Treese?
I just wanted to say that I concur with the temporary, the midpoint decision. So thank you, Stephen, for your input. Robbie did a great job in outlining it. Thank you.
Commissioner Rogers and Commissioner Fye, any thoughts at this juncture?
No, I think it's solidified. I was talking about a moratorium. That's exactly what we're talking about. And I think that that's exactly where we're ending up, which is good.
And as said earlier, today's not a decision. It's just giving our staff some input on where we stand right now. Great. Thank you very much. I know we have a lot to cover today. Some unusual topics. So onward ho, we go to the next one. From mushrooms to people. The next topic is reapportionment, a presentation of proposed options to take out for community input. So I'll turn it over to you, Ms. Angie.
And Sia Lindstrom's going to kick this conversation off. Sia?
Terrific. Thank you, Ms. Angie. I appreciate that. For the record, my name is Sia Lindstrom with the County Administrative Office. And presenting with me today on our Commissioner District Reapportionment Project is Dr. Ethan Sherigan. I hope he is in the audience, from Portland State University. Also Amanda Garcia Snell, our Community Engagement Manager. And Tom Carr is going to be filling in for me if I run into any connectivity issues today. I'm working remotely. So Tom is in the wings if I need him. Also in the wings, in case we need them, are Joe Nelson, our Director of Assessment Taxation, and Steve March, our Consultant and Redistricting Specialist. So we have the team here in case you need them for this conversation. And Brenda Bartlett, I think, is running slides for us. So Brenda, next slide. So the purpose of today's work session is to review the redistricting proposals developed by PSU and ask you to provide staff with direction about which proposals should be moved forward for community engagement. So we'll briefly review the project timeline. We'll look at the current district boundaries, and we'll review the factors that your board forwarded to PSU in March to use in development of these options. Then finally, I'll turn it over to Dr. Sherigan for the deep dive into PSU's methodology and the 5 proposals they've developed. The last step will be input from Amanda Garcia Snell on the community engagement that's coming next before we turn it over to you. Next slide, Brenda. So as a reminder, this is the timeline for our reapportionment process. We've completed the first 3 steps already. You appointed Joe Nelson as your county official in February and referred the factors to PSU in March. And PSU has now completed the proposal development process, which was June last month. So we're about to launch into the 5th step, which is to first release the proposals for community engagement and then bring the results of that engagement back to your board in September. As a reminder, this will affect the 2024 election. While we plan to be done by November or December, we must complete the process by January 6th, at the very latest, 2023, so that candidates can file on time. Next slide, Brenda. So this is an overview of our current district boundaries. And on the right-hand side of the screen are the cities and neighborhoods that our current districts include. The small table in the middle shows the current population based on the 2020 census data. As a reminder, our charter says that if a district is out of alignment by more than 5%, a reapportionment process is triggered. And the district boundaries must be realigned to bring back population balance to a difference of no more than 3%. So you can see that when Joe Nelson brought you the 2020 census analysis earlier this year, it showed that District 2 was the district that had grown in population more quickly than the other 3 districts and was out of population balance by almost 9%. Next slide, please, Brenda. So these are the factors that your board forwarded to PSU several months ago. So they'll look familiar to you. As a reminder, the factors on the left are state factors to be considered as near as practicable. The factors on the right, the first 3, are the additional factors your board elected to add to those state factors. The last 2 factors on the left came up through the first phase of our community engagement process. And your board asked that those factors be included and forwarded to PSU as well. Brenda, next slide. And with that, unless there are any questions about background, I will turn it over to Ethan, Dr. Sherrigan from PSU. Ethan, are you with us?
Thank you, Sia. Yeah. So the kind of gave informal names to each one of the proposals that you'll see today to distinguish them from each other. The first proposal we'll talk about is one which is based on the current boundaries and changing kind of the minimum amount of square footage, if you will, kind of the minimum amount of footprint changes that would enable rebalancing of districts to within the standards set out in the charter. The second proposal is one which focuses urban areas into districts so that there are a district is as much as possible urban or rural. So in that one, you'll see that District 1 excludes all the current area that is outside of urban, and you'll see that also big changes in District 3 and 2 there that move eastward into urban concentrated areas. The third proposal is one is called Urban and Rural Balance. This was an attempt to show what would happen if we wanted to ensure that every district had some representation of rural parts of the county in the district. And the proposal 4 uses community boundaries, including the school districts, parks and recreation districts, and neighborhoods in order to try to avoid splitting areas of common interest. We developed also after our first round of one-on-one consultations, there was a call for an additional plan, which is kind of a variation that adopts elements of proposal 2 and 4. It's one in which we try to concentrate urban areas, but use UPAA boundaries, really to focus on those versus other boundaries like school districts in order when we're talking about communities. All right, next slide. So in the report that you should have received, which accompanies the presentation, you'll see information specifically on the demographics of each of the districts under each of the proposals. That's a lot of information to digest, so it's not going to be presented on the slides here, but you can find that detailed information in reports. If we summarize kind of major differences from the baseline in each one of the proposals, it would be fair to say that proposals 2, 3, and 4 show a reduced concentration or reduced representation of Hispanic population of the county in District 1, and proposal 3 shows an increased concentration in District 4. The other kind of significant issues are flagged here. I think that just to talk briefly about income, there was some interest in ensuring that there was representation of people at all levels of socioeconomic status in each one of the districts. I think the good news is that that is mostly accomplished in the baseline and in all of the current plans. Every district does have approximately equal proportions of most of the income quintiles. There is an exception that there is a slightly higher concentration of the very highest earning households in District 2. And some of the proposals you'll see today, particularly 2, 4, and 5, slightly reduce that concentration by changing the composition of District 2. Next slide. So let me orient you to what you'll see. This is how we'll present each one of the proposals. On the left, you see a map of the proposal. Each one of the districts is colored a different color, and there's some hatch marks there. The hatching indicates an area that was previously part of a different district that is now part of that new district. So the colors represent the district, and the hashing over the colors means that, for example, in the northwest corner of District 2, there's an area that moves to District 4 that was previously part of District 2. So notable changes in this plan, again, this is the minimal change plan, preservation, it's called proposal, are that District 2, so District 1, District 1, which is the south part of Beaverton, adds the tile flat area that's in the southwest corner of District 1. It includes the southern part of Cedar Hills, that's in the northeast corner of District 1. And the borders around the Aloha UPAA remain as they are right now. District 2 is the one that has a large population imbalance, and so population moves to District 4 and also to 3 and to so each one of the other districts gains something from District 2. There's a change there to just normalize that boundary between 2 and 4 along Cornelius Pass Road. I won't spend more time on this unless there are questions, or we can move on to the next proposal. So this proposal is one which, again, concentrates districts to either try and be exclusively rural or urban. So it's almost kind of a thought experiment. I think the expectation is that there will be revisions to whichever one or multiple plans want to be advanced. But they kind of represent a pure form of the directions that we were given. And urban-rural definition here is based on Census Bureau's definition. So those are based on population density rather than actually on planning areas. So significant changes here. Districts 2 and 3 in particular really concentrate on the eastern part, the very high population density areas. District 1 is already mostly urban, but in order to move some of the urban area that was in District 1 into 3, so that 3 is exclusively urban, it has to move north and east up to Highway 26, all through the West Slope, Raleigh Hills, Montclair area. Okay, but the changes I think are pretty well explained in that map. So if there are no other questions, we can move to the next proposal. So this is one where we ask the question, what might it look like if we wanted each district to include a significant part of the county's rural population to balance the urban and rural areas in each district. You see that there's really significant changes here. I think that the core area of each district does remain the same. You know, District 4 is still centered around Hillsboro's population center, for example. District 1 still South Beaverton. But the outer areas of the districts change significantly. So District 2 for example, now extends all the way to the northwest corner of the county, everywhere kind of north of Highway 26. And District 3 probably changes the least in this scenario. There already exists a balance, which you can see from the relatively small amount of hatching in District 3. And District 1 now extends to the kind of out to the Gaston area in the southern and southwestern part of the county. All right, on to the next proposal then. So this proposal, there'll be a supplemental map, I think, on the next slide, which we can show the exact boundaries used to construct these divisions. But the concepts here are that we wanted to avoid splitting cities, school districts, parks and recreation districts, and so that's accomplished here with these changes. District 1 extends to the eastern part of the county. Other significant changes are there, but what it accomplishes is that District 3 now entirely encompasses the Tigard Tualatin Aquatic District, and Districts 1 and 2 split the Tualatin Hills Parks and Recreation District. Neighborhoods here are also shown. We did use neighborhoods and tried not to split neighborhoods when it was possible to avoid. But again, this proposal didn't explicitly consider UPA boundaries. I think it was one thing that we didn't have on hand with our data, and so you know, the communities of interest didn't capture that aspect. And so that was the motivation to develop the 5th proposal that you'll see on the next page. Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, the next slide actually. Let's look at the next slide for a moment. So this is a busy slide, but I can kind of walk you through what you're seeing here. These are all the input layers which were used in the consideration of how to draw the districts for proposal 4. So on the right-hand side, I'll start with, you see kind of the teal shading for the Tualatin Hills Park and Recreation District. The lighter part of the teal shading is the part where the city of Beaverton overlaps with that Parks and Recreation District. And likewise for the Tualatin Hills Park and Recreation District is shown with shading with cities overlaid on top. So everything that's kind of a lighter shade, a lighter blue shade is a city incorporated area boundary. The red lines, which you may see on the map, represent school districts. So one of the reasons for such an irregular boundary around western edge boundary on District 3 here is because we wanted to avoid splitting the Gaston School District in this scenario. So we kind of rectify that western border of District 3. It still becomes necessary to split the Hillsboro School District, but we find a dividing line that balances population when we divide that school district between Districts 3 and 4, and so on. Districts 1 and 2 approximately share and divide the Beaverton School District. A little bit of area outside the school district they include there just to maintain a balanced population. All right, next slide. All right, so this is the new proposal, which we kind of changed the way we think about what represents communities of interest to represent the UPAA areas, the cities themselves, as well as the planning areas set aside for possible UGB expansions or future incorporation into the cities. The contents of are shown here, the contents of the neighborhoods as well as the city boundaries that are there. You know, we've, I think, reduced the number of splits, but only modestly. So part of our charge was to try and not divide a city into more than 2 districts. That is accomplished. We did reduce the number of splits of Beaverton, for example, into just Districts 1 and 2, whereas I think previously part of it was in District 3. But I think I wanted to highlight that it's still, we weren't able to avoid dividing Hillsboro. So Hillsboro is divided a different way here than in the previous plan. For example, the southern part of the city now is in District 3, whereas in the previous plans, more of the northern part of Hillsboro was in District 2. And that was kind of the case in the status quo. So what we offered here is a concept which puts more of the north and northeastern part, the Orenco area, into District 4, and in exchange for using the southern part of the city going to District 3 south of the Tualatin Valley Highway. And this will become a little clearer, so we can go look at the next slide to see where the UPAA areas actually overlap. And so we, in this plan, you know, some areas that we kind of naturally maybe think of as more having more affinity to, you know, maybe District 1 or 2 Beaverton area, for example, Metzger, is actually part of a different planning area for the city of Tigard. So we see here that boundary, that dividing line between Districts 1 and 3 is now really strictly drawn along that UPAA boundary. So I wanted to call that out because that was kind of something that I think a couple of folks didn't realize where that UPAA boundary is on the eastern part of the county. The other thing you see here is that Districts 1, 2, and 4 now follow more or less the western edge of the Beaverton UPAA. The exception here is kind of the Rock Creek area, Orenco area, and Aloha. So Aloha encompasses some of the lighter pink area that you see in the map on the right, kind of zoomed in. That's part of the Hillsboro planning area. And then it also includes the light green shaded area that's currently a part of District 1. So this plan keeps 80% of the population of Aloha in District 1, but 20% of the population does move to District 2. And we do that in order to avoid having District 2 coming further into Hillsboro. So even with that change, we still did have to put a little part of some kind of housing developments on the outskirts of the Orenco area into District 2, which are currently already part of District 2. We just kind of weren't able to retreat the boundary all the way. All right. So I think if there are questions on any proposals, I'm happy to answer them. If there's specific boundary questions about roads, or if there are any other kind of questions, again, there's some supplemental demographic data on the race ethnicity distribution and the income distribution for each one of the districts under each one of the proposals. Happy to follow up, but if there aren't any questions, I guess we can continue to the community input. Thank you.
We, Chair Harrington, if this works for you, we go ahead and have Amanda finish off with the community engagement section, and then we can turn it over to you all for questions I'm sure that you'll have for Ethan. So Amanda, go ahead then.
Great, thank you. So as you may recall, we're conducting community engagement in 3 phases. The first phase is complete, and as was mentioned, it provided 2 boundary factor considerations: the socio-economic status and urban-rural boundaries. And then we are now moving into phase 2 and 3. In the first phase of community engagement, in addition to the factor considerations, we also heard from community-based organizations and partners additional recommendations for effective engagement with culturally specific groups and suggestions related to communications. And so we're referencing those recommendations as we work through the community engagement plan with espousal. So in phase 2, which we are deep into the planning, and doing in collaboration with community-based organizations and partners, we are really looking to hold in-person, culturally specific events. Hopefully we can still do in-person. And then these would be, as I mentioned, we're working in collaboration with community-based organizations. And so we'll be co-creating those, the planning of that and co-hosting those events with our partners. Then in phase 3, we'll be doing more general community engagement. And so this will be an in-person opportunity, potentially an online open house. And then we will also be doing an online survey to share whatever the proposed boundaries that you all would like us to take out to the community. We'll be sharing those with the community to get their input. Most recently, and this is sort of hot off the press, depending on the outcome of this meeting, we may be able to take some proposed boundaries to the fair on next Saturday and have those available for people who are visiting the fair to let us know what their preferences or share comments related to them. And that is all for community engagement.
Okay, and then the next slide, thank you, Brenda, is just a quick summary again of our timeline. So with direction from you today, we will release proposals for community engagement, as Amanda mentioned, even as early as next Saturday, and be back to your board in September with the results of that engagement process. So we now turn it over to you for discussion. So the key question that's highlighted on this slide is, which proposals would you like to move forward for phases 2 and 3 of community engagement? And whenever you're ready for it, there we go. The next slide has the 5 proposals side by side in case that's useful for you. And with that, I turn it over to you. Thank you all.
Commissioner Treese, why don't you kick us off?
Well, thank you, Chair. And I may have missed my opportunity to ask this question, but I'm going to ask it. I'm going to ask it now. And it has to do with the maps. This issue came up at the CPO 7 meeting that I attended on Monday night, just last night. And it's about a parcel that's about 150 acres located east of 185th and west of North Bethany. And it's kind of part of the North Bethany area. It's and I don't know if there's one parcel that moves that piece out of District 2 and away from Bethany. Can you help me with that, Ethan?
Yeah, so there's 2 things we can do. One, I can share with you a link, or someone can maybe in the chat. I guess we don't have that chat enabled. There is a link where you can actually, there's an online proposal viewer, and you can enter in an address. I don't think it works with a tax lot number, but if you have a street address or a series of street addresses, and then you can see how those overlay with each one of the proposals. I do have that browser open, and so there's some way I can kind of find exactly kind of a street segment, or I think with just a parcel, I have to go back probably and find out exactly where that parcel is and what addresses might be contained there. So I couldn't answer that directly right now.
Okay.
But it's certainly a question which we can answer, very expediently, given either an address or a series of addresses in that web tool.
And the reason I'm bringing this forward is that the CPO 7 feels strongly that this piece is part of the North Bethany area and should stay there. Mm-hmm. It also involves the extension of Shackelford, or the potential extension of Shackelford Road. So I just want to get that out there and share that I've already heard from our community that separating that out of the contiguous District 2 is not their preference.
Okay.
So
Um,
could you clarify, Ethan, will that, I missed the availability of that tool as part of the material for today's packet. Will the public have access to that tool, or is that something that you subject matter experts have access to?
I think the vision is that it would be available. The URL is mentioned at the end of the report, so easy to miss. And I think once the decision is made on kind of what plans should be forwarded for discussion, then plans may, disappear. Right now, all of them are shown. And then, before that URL is kind of publicized, we can take options out. And then I think, Commissioner Treese, the comment that you have is exactly the kind of thing that we want to collect during the kind of feedback phase. I'm just kind of mentally thinking, I don't have the grasp of the geography perfectly well, but what I'm thinking about where Shackelford Road is pretty deep into, close to the boundary between Multnomah and Washington counties. And so if that's the case, if I'm thinking of the right area, then actually that kind of area right along that boundary, that remains in District 2 under all the different proposals.
There is concern that one of them didn't include it. So I'm just registering that. We can move forward here, but thank you.
Other commissioners, I really anticipated there would be a bunch of questions, clarifying questions on where's this road and which line is this road and so forth.
Chair, I've had a chance, and I think others, to ask those questions in our briefings. So I know I got a lot of information then. So thank you.
Great, good. Commissioner Willie.
Oh, great.
No, go ahead, Roy, if you want to jump in there.
Oh, there he is.
Yeah, thank you. I kind of tend to, I really don't care a bunch, but I kind of tend to gravitate to Proposal 5. I think that if you went back 25 or more years or 30 years, you'd see that looks about like District 3 and 4 looked like back in those days. I like the idea that District 1 extends to the east. It should. I mean, those folks are going to be in Beaverton someday. I like the idea that things are trying to have a UPAA lens and view. I know I think it was Jerry and you and I met at the same time, or maybe it was Lisa and I can't remember, whoever, when we briefed, but that was my issue. I just thought that we might be thoughtful about this and look at where things were directing as far as growth. So that's my thoughts. I don't have any big issues. I mean, whatever we pick, but 5 seems to be more forward-looking to me. So that's my comments.
Am I up? Did I lose everybody?
No, yes, you're up.
Okay, it was really, really quiet. And I thought, I think I might be frozen. Well, I guess from my standpoint, just looking at all of these, I didn't look at specifically where the lines were. I have a tendency to, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I don't think there's anything currently in our districting that really violates the proposals that we were asking them to evaluate. So I tend to lean towards Proposal 1 just because it has the most minimal amount of adjustments. And I guess I think when I think about most of the constituents that I talk to, unless they're really rural, they have no idea what district they are. As a matter of fact, a lot of times when I make presentations, I talk about that the county is divided into 4 districts. And then we have an overall chair for all of the county. And then I began to explain what my geographic boundaries are generally. And it's kind of enlightening to them and all of that, but I don't think anybody has this burning concern that they are in District 2 or District 4 or whatever, and they really want to be in a different district. And I think the more boundaries that we change, I guess the more confusion that would be. And so I'm advocating that we stick with proposal number 1. And yeah, like I said, minimal change.
I'll go next, Chair Harrington, if that's okay. I see you muted. Yeah, I too had a briefing. I forget if it was with Roy. I agree with you, Roy. So a while back, thank you, Sia and Tom. I think we asked all the questions, however appropriate or inappropriate for a public hearing or a public forum. So thank you for that opportunity to the staff to ask those questions. And I am, I think the question is, let me scroll to the actual slide. Sia, to your question about which proposals would you like, I myself is in alignment with Commissioner Willie around proposal 1 being my favorite. But in terms of community engagement, I think I'm in favor of putting all 5 proposals in front of the community, just for the opportunity to learn about Washington County, to learn about the demographics that are in these districts, and also share the concerns and the impacts that Ethan did a wonderful job of laying out, like district, proposal 2. I have, concerns about the concentrations of our demographic community being potentially reduced and whatnot. So I think while I have my own favorite and agree if it's not broken, why fix it? I am in favor in terms of providing an answer to you, Sia, to say, I would like to send all 5 proposals to the community and see what the community engagement and go on that journey of learning with the community as well. I would love to hear what they say about each proposals.
Commissioner Treese, you started us off with a clarifying question. Did you want to come back to the key question?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and I did get in the process here. I did get the answer that it is proposal 2 that is the problematic proposal for CPO 7. So just that, I'd like to register that, and I am in agreement with Commissioner Willie. I think everybody I've heard so far about proposal 1. I also do like proposal 5. I think that it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we provide as much information to our constituents as possible. But at the same time, I want to make sure that we're culling this so that we're not presenting impossible decisions as well. So, I'm kind of thinking that maybe we'd be better off to go with a smaller number of options, but at the same time, I respect what Commissioner Feist is saying. So I'm kind of at odds here with myself. But I did want to call out that proposal 2 has already created some controversy, if you will. So thank you for coming back to me, Chair.
You're welcome. So I am interested in seeing all 5 go out. Can't hurt. I do agree with Commissioner Treese's observation on policy 2. Mostly, I want to make sure that it's clear we're looking for input, and folks can have, for example, pro-con feedback on each of the proposals, right? And that's good info to have. I'm not worried about there being 5 proposals per se. I think people will decide which ones they want to weigh in on. Some may want all 5, some may just look at the summary pictures and say, yes, no, I don't want to spend their valuable time commenting on it. I do have a clarifying question, or a question for clarification, and that is the time for community engagement. Can you remind me of what the minimal amount of time, at least the online survey, will be available for folks to provide feedback?
Sure. So the online, we're in conversations right now with Patinkin, who will be handling the online survey. And so that may be live as shortly after we have proposals to share with community. And then that will be live the entire time that we're conducting community engagement, which will be through the end of August.
So minimally, it will be 4 weeks, maximally around 6. So my question is, minimally, how many weeks will it be available?
So it depends on if you are all in agreement that with what proposal should go out to the community today, then we can give that to Patinkin, and as soon as I think they're almost ready to go. So so I think that we could have something fairly quickly, like within a week, but I don't know, because we don't know what the proposals will be that we'll be taking to the community. But as soon as we have that, we're ready to go with community engagement, with the plan, and then it'll be up to the vendor, the Patinkin, on how quickly they can get that turned around.
Sorry, I just tipped my Kleenex box over. So Ms. Angie, I would say, I won't, as one commissioner, I think we need to have a 4-week comment process. Okay, it's summertime. We need to use all of our tools to let folks know that we're seeking their input on options. So that was my question. What is the minimal amount of time that we're trying to ensure makes happen? So my last, so sure, I have some thoughts, but they're irrelevant for today's conversation. I would like to compliment the team. The visualizations really do help. And I found what you put together for distinguishing proposals 4 and 5 useful, because there's a nuance there. And I didn't expect to be so intrigued by option 5 or proposal 5, as Commissioner Rogers suggested. But I do think it balances what many of the mayors have already given feedback for on the state legislative boundaries, right? Don't split us. And what I've heard feedback from commissioners who are balancing multiple cities as well as multiple urban unincorporated areas. And Commissioners Treese, Fye, and Rogers hear about that the most in their districts. So thank you very much. I'm very comfortable with each of these options as you have proposed, and hope that we can move forward with all of them. And if there were any to be dropped, then I would suggest option 2 or proposal 2, in case commissioners wanted to reduce the set from 5 down to 4. Commissioner Willie, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And I would, that's kind of where I was going. I was going to say, if we know that proposal 2 already is problematic, that I would suggest then we don't include proposal 2 in the community engagement. And if we could also, if we're going to, when we go out to the community, then could we add what it looks like currently, so that they have a comparison of, okay, this is where I am, or this is what the entire county looks like, and have a comparative to where we're going and where we are currently. So that's what I would recommend we add in there. And if we do take out proposal 2, please don't renumber them because then we won't have any point of reference to previous conversations we've had. So I don't know how you do that, but yeah, please don't renumber them.
Chair Harrington, I think I am hearing from a number of you about releasing potentially all 5 of them and potentially dropping proposal 2. Commissioner Willie, I appreciate your feedback about not renumbering for a minimum of 4 weeks through the survey work for community engagement. Chair, I'd just ask your assistance in figuring out whether there's consensus on dropping number 2 or going forward with all 5.
Okay. Commissioners, going to propose that how many are comfortable in dropping proposal number 2 so we only go out with 4? Okay. How many would want the full set of 5? Okay. Commissioner Fye, if you might, could you help me enlighten? Could you help enlighten at least me in terms of what does option 2 provide for you? And it could just be as simply as why not, right? But if there's anything that perhaps there may be something that I'm not appreciating detail-wise about option 2, so I thought I'd ask you.
I think my comment back to that is just to hear the feedback, and I think knowing that they can redraw the lines other ways, they, simply there might be some good information to gain from that feedback.
Mm-hmm.
For both for District 2 and District 1, because the population reduction, especially for our District 1's Hispanic community, is also problematic, but there might be good information to gain from the community.
Yeah. I agree with you. I'm not bothered by the scope of having 5, but I'm also not adverse to having just 4. Are there any other benefits other than possible volume of input to have to digest that staff could enlighten us on?
I would turn to Ethan and Amanda if there is anything in proposal 2 that you think would be useful in particular to highlight. Ethan, you may be the best one to answer that for us.
Sure. I think the way to think about each one of the proposals is there can be elements of it that really stand out to people. So they may, people may not like proposal 2, and we may not maintain elements of it. But someone might say, oh, that boundary I like. Can we keep that? But keep other elements of other plans. So I think that would be the only thing that wasn't mentioned. No opinion one way or the other, but each one of the boundaries was try to draw them in a unique way so that elements might be kept.
So Commissioner Treese, I hear you 100% that you've already gotten initial feedback. We need to make sure that's part of the formal feedback from the community. Is, from your perspective, does it burden you or in any way burden community members just to have 5 options and to have number 2 there and simply for them to say, no, don't want it, don't like it?
Well, actually, that's exactly what I was thinking, that by keeping it in, it gives us one to throw out. So there is that. And I think that what's most important is that this piece of information that I bring to the table from CPO 7 gets embedded, as you mentioned, into the community feedback piece. But I don't have any particular heartburn in keeping it there. I just want to make sure that we're registering what the difficulty is by moving that one parcel out of District 2, because it is a community issue there. So I'm not, while I appreciate the support to remove it, I don't think it's a problem if it stays, with the understanding that it's not the best option for me at this particular point.
Yeah. So I think essentially there are at least 3 of us that are totally comfortable in sticking with the 5. We do have a clarification or potentially a comment from one of our presenters. Go ahead, Ethan.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, just not to complicate things, but one other option I could throw out there is that we could edit proposal 2 before it goes out. So if it's something we wanted to keep, but we know right off the bat, we can anticipate some feedback we get, we could make those adjustments and then put out a proposal 2 version 2.
Well, that's interesting. So I just want to make sure I understand. So what you're saying is you could look at that one parcel and move it back into District 2. That I'm referring to. Is that correct? I don't know what it does population wise, but I suspect there's not a huge population base there.
That's right. That's what I'm proposing. So if that's something that's an attractive option, we would be able to find a way to rebalance the other districts with hopefully minimal changes to the way they're formulated in the plan too.
To my fellow commissioners, I would support that, because then we've got the option of looking at 5 options that we know people can respond to without a negative just start out of the gates.
Commissioners, thumbs up on that idea? Minor modification to proposal 2. Sorry, Commissioner Rogers, I didn't catch you.
Yeah, that's not significant to me. If somebody wants to do that, that's fine, and we'll have 5.
Okay, great. Let's do it.
And Chair Harrington and Board, so just to confirm, we will release all 5 for community engagement as soon as Ethan is able to give us a modified 2A with that minor change. We'll go ahead and release all 5. And we won't necessarily bring that proposal 2A back to you all in work session before we release. And just want to confirm that's okay. Great, good. We will get that done and out to you.
And see if I could just add, with a minimum of a 4-week engagement window.
Yes. Minimum 4 weeks. And I see Amanda nodding her head at that to confirm that we can make that happen. We'll work with Ethan to get that turned around pretty quickly. I see him nodding his head as well. So I think with that, we have what we need. Chair Harrington, Board and Commissioners, thank you very much.
I have a quick question.
Of course.
Sorry. So you're going to release 5 maps. I think even it's not your fault, but I think I had to get lost the last. I'm okay with the changes, just so you were clear, but I did get lost the last part. So bear with me. So you're releasing 5 maps, but really you're releasing 6 maps. Is that correct? Because it will be option 2, proposal 2, and then my changes to the proposal 2, or are we just releasing that change?
Right. So we would be replacing proposal 2 with proposal 2A. Thank you for that clarifying question. I appreciate it. Yes, unless you all tell us otherwise, we would replace proposal 2 with proposal 2A and still just release 5.
Okay. So I've had my briefings, the questions were centered with these maps. So does the demographics, any of that nuances change? Even like,
yeah, we will we'll have to update
calibrate
the report as well.
Okay.
So you're right. So in addition to the boundary changes, we can rerun the numbers and provide that too. New version of the report.
Thank you. Yeah, that was my question, and I'm okay with the, yeah, with the 5 maps.
Great. Thank you for asking that clarifying question. Okay. Thank you all very much.
All righty, we have one more topic before we take a break. So we have a topic to discuss a proposed equitable community engagement policy.
And I think Latricia is joining. There she is.
Thank you. It does take a moment to join and unmute, so apologize for that delay. Good afternoon, Chair Harrington and Board of Commissioners. For the record, my name is Latricia Tillman. I'm the Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer for Washington County. And in setting the stage for this conversation, I wanted to note that since I started in 2020, the community engagement team has been working to center equity in all of its efforts, as noted in the strategic vision Amanda Garcia Snell, our community engagement manager, has shared in several quarterly updates. This effort to center equity and community engagement has been very well embraced internally, with several questions and asks for guidance being elevated by staff wanting to lean into this practice. And as we began engaging in regional efforts to coordinate community engagement related to your ARPA investments, we learned that our partner jurisdictions are also grappling with the same questions and concerns about what equitable community engagement looks like. To the extent possible, we hope to learn from our partners in other jurisdictions, and to the extent practicable, align our policies to reinforce a consistent approach to equitable community engagement across Washington County and its cities. So today we're pleased to bring the proposed policy to you for your feedback and to understand any questions, concern, or direction you may have. And with that, I'll turn it over to Amanda Garcia Snell, our Community Engagement Manager, to walk through the policy proposal. Amanda?
Thanks, Latricia. And I'm sharing a couple of slides we pulled together. I don't know if you can see them. Hopefully you can see them. Really, it's just the information that's in the documents that you received. It just seemed like it might be helpful to have something put together in a visual format of some sort. So as Latricia mentioned, I'm here. Can you not? I'm looking at your face. Can you not see them? Yeah, okay. Okay, I'll just move forward. Okay, great. So as Latricia mentioned, I'm here to share the equitable community engagement policy. As you may be aware, we've been talking about needing something like this type of policy for quite some time. We began working on this earlier this year, and we started, like so many things that we work on, trying to not reinvent the wheel. That was a little tricky because there aren't a lot of wheels like this out there. And so we look to other jurisdictions, and although lots of jurisdictions are talking about having community engagement guidelines or policies, there weren't a lot of documents to review. And so we did our best with what we could find. And then we also looked to the equity resolution, as well as our own internal expertise around community engagement best practices to bring you this first draft. So the background is that the intent is to really center equity, diversity, and inclusion, remove boundaries to participation, and then really have a shared understanding across the organization of community engagement best practices. And I will jump right into the policy guidelines. And so the first set of responsibilities on the policy guidelines, these are really about utilizing our community engagement spectrum, which is a document that that helps identify how much input or influence the community may have on particular decision making, and being really clear about that up front so that they can be engaged transparently in the process, and then making your plans based on how much opportunity they have to inform and or collaborate, or what that degree of involvement might be. We want to have something that's inclusive and accessible, consider and incorporate people's input, report to you all, the board, as needed or requested around engagement efforts, and then really work to increase the capacity and capabilities across the organization within departments. There are varying degrees of capacity and capabilities around community engagement across the organization. And so this is an opportunity to really grow that and support that through OEICE. And then there are exceptions, implementation and review, and that is all pretty typical policy language in county policies from what I could tell. And so I didn't spend much time on that. And then the engagement guidelines. So as I mentioned, we would be looking to utilize the community engagement spectrum. We would involve representatives from focus communities. So whatever communities we're trying to reach, we would try to do our best to involve representatives from those communities as we design the community engagement plan, partner with community-based organizations, and then develop a community engagement plan. And community engagement plans, there are lots of models around that, and they have some basic elements. We've outlined those in the procedure that we're working on to accompany this if we continue forward with this direction. And then we would also have outreach and communication standards, culturally specific considerations, language accessibility, do things in a trauma-informed way, and then compensation is another piece of this, and that's a big topic of conversation. Lots of interest around how do we compensate the public and community for their time and emotional labor and all that they provide when we ask them to serve in a variety of roles, whether that's on boards and commissions or other advisory capacities or project-specific work groups or reviewing plans for us. So in all those ways, really thinking through how we would compensate people. Those are the elements so far in the engagement guidelines, and all of that is outlined in the attached draft policy. And that I would open it up for your input. Our question is, I'd like to get some feedback, and then also, is this something that you're interested in considering, and continue to work on this and bring it back?
So commissioners, any questions or comments in providing some feedback to staff? Commissioner Rogers, go ahead.
Sure, I need to look at it a little more depth, but volunteers are volunteers to me. I personally will not vote for this when it comes before us if there's a compensation clause in there. I think that is beyond the pale. I've mentioned that to a number of folks that I personally know, and they find it objectionable as well. So that's the issue that is most heartburning, if you want to say it to me, that I don't, I think we're asking for volunteers. These aren't paid political positions. And so that's very bothersome to me.
Go ahead, Commissioner Willie.
Yeah, I would concur. I think that's the thing that jumped out at me. Mostly every one of us that's on this, in this meeting, and certainly in any other board position, we have all donated thousands of hours, not expecting to be compensated. We do it because we want to have a voice, and because we want to participate in the direction our county or our cities or respective organizations are going. So I think compensation puts a different twist to why they're in that position. So I would agree with Roy. I can't support the compensation part.
Any other comments? Or do you want me to jump in? Go ahead, Commissioner Treese.
Thank you for the work on this. I think it's good, and I also want to ask how this design matches up to our, to best practices, if you will, in like communities, so I can understand, just some of these components.
Sure. So it is a best practice to have a policy related to the standards and guidelines that you use for community engagement, so that is handled the same across the organization. Washington County doesn't have that. We do things differently depending on who is leading the effort, what consultants we're working with, or what staff capacity there is, what time is available. Although there's a lot of thoughtfulness and planning across the organization that staff engage in, there are no standards right now. And so that is an important component in terms of best practice. The elements that are in a community engagement plan include things around connecting with the community early in the planning process to get their input on what is the best way to engage with them, how to communicate, all the way down to what locations have the least barriers for people, or what formats of meeting have the least barriers. So a lot of those types of considerations, and then also evaluating so that we can improve every time that we do something, and we can share that learning across the organization. So those pieces are best practices. Included in that around reducing barriers as compensation as well. And I am hearing the comments, but I also just want to share that there are other jurisdictions that are doing this. Metro in particular is one that we've looked at their guidance around this, but really it's an opportunity to reduce barriers for people who have not been historically included or are challenged to participate because of transportation, childcare, those sort of things. We also are looking at, what is an appropriate meeting time? What is the least barrier meeting time for particular opportunity? There are different levels of the compensation that we'll be proposing based on what we're asking of people. So is this a one-time, workshop? Is it a one-time open house? Or are we asking someone to serve for 2 years on an advisory committee and do work in between? And I think we have varying degrees of ask within our boards and commissions currently, and moving forward with boards and commissions that we may be creating, like the Advisory Council on Racial Equity, for example, in comparison to some that have been around for a long time, and maybe the work is different, or some boards and commissions have very technical work that takes more time. I think what we're also asking of communities of color and our Black, Indigenous communities of color and other immigrant refugee participants is really asking them to bring their lived experience to these processes. And that has an emotional, there is labor associated with that and an emotional toll. And that is a barrier to some people. And so we really want to be thoughtful about all of the barriers that currently exist and what can we do to reduce those, so that we can really hear from our full community, diverse members of our community, and people that we haven't heard from in the past. And I think we can do that individually in OEICE, but ideally we would be doing that across the organization and help us de-silo some of that work across the organization and have shared practices and understanding of what that is and why it's of value.
Thank you. And I think Latricia, you may be wanting to add to that. And I guess, Amanda, you provided a lot of depth there. I appreciate that. And I would also just like, if we have data that shows, the benefits associated. My understanding after working on some Metro related projects was that the degree of participation and the depth of participation when those barriers are not there anymore really improves the outcome of what the decision-making processes are for those that are advising either the commission or whomever.
And Chair Harrington, if I may add, when we started the Public Health Advisory Board in Multnomah County a number of years ago, we did offer compensation for advisory board members, for all advisory board members. Many people did not take the compensation. And so offering it does not automatically require people to accept it, but it does help to mitigate all the barriers that Amanda mentioned very thoroughly. And I think just from an equity perspective, we can't just center our experience, our approach, and make policy from that, but we really have to listen to communities who have felt like they have not been able to participate, and not everybody can afford to volunteer.
Other commissioners at this? Go ahead, Commissioner Fye.
Amanda and team, you did a great job of this, presenting this information. I really honestly thought this would have been an easy thumbs up. So I was ready to give you my thumbs up, but I'm gonna just provide a few comments to say, as a community member who participated in committees that provided some compensations, and these aren't money to add to your salary. These are like for childcare, for transportation to even get there. So we're really talking about people who need this assistance to volunteer and not necessarily have a salary to contribute to to come to our meetings, to pay for their child's care, to pay for their transportation. So I think I'm in support, and you know, it will be disenjoyment for me to not support, because I've benefited and I have gotten childcare help. And so I support this and good work, and look forward to, you know, the value that we add to our community.
Thank you, Commissioner Fye. I'll go next. I have a clarifying question on the policy guidelines. It's specific to page 2 of the draft administrative policy under the section policy guidelines, section 1, responsibilities, specifically in section 1.1.1. Okay, so there's a series of items expressed using semicolons, and the one that is a little not clear to me is the case of when the community has raised or expressed an interest. And why I have a reaction on this one is I was thinking about how right now, or for a long time, there are limited land use and transportation resources, just as one example, right? And so the county has a track record of proposing a work plan to balance the resources, right? And then to get feedback on that proposed. And ultimately, the board has to balance a lot of competing interests and needs. But it's the board working with the county administrator that has to make sure that we're being mindful of how are we balancing the resources that are available, whether it's personnel, money, or time, and community needs or interests. And so I'm not sure I'm taking that particular part of the clause correctly. Could you help enlighten me on that? Because I feel like it says, oh, well, you know, worst case, the board's irrelevant. Community just gets to direct staff directly. I don't think that's what you're intending. So, so I thought I'd ask.
Yeah, thank you for your question. No, that's not what we're intending. And so I'll work on clarifying that. Really, the intent of this section was to align with the different points on the community engagement spectrum. And so is the opportunity to inform, is it to consult, you know, are we collaborating? What is to what degree are we engaging the community? So we'll clarify that and clear that section up. Thank you.
Okay, so then I follow you. I did read the different pages. Then I'm trying to, I appreciate that there's the policy and then there are procedures. And I just want to make sure that as one of 5 that considers, you know, adopting the policy that I can see where one particular aspect of this, or a couple of aspects, are addressed through perhaps the procedures. I don't know. Specifically, it's been really interesting to see how online access has changed over the course of the last 10 years. Tools, there are some really powerful tools, right? And some people reliant upon computers at libraries, potentially having a workstation here at PSB or at community partners, people using tablets or phones. But I'm reminded occasionally that some of our packets, like Planning Commission packets, get humongous or have really detailed maps. And boy, I would not want to have to look at the topic we were just on with the decade maps and try and use it on my smartphone. As powerful as this little device is, there's still a level of granularity where I may be interested or would need to use a larger display versus a smaller. So I just want to make sure that we have, through adopting a policy, we're empowering through your consistency, making sure that we're aiming for usability, right? For the broadest community possible. Am I trending towards the right level of comfort and enabling that you're intending? That's all I'm looking for, gut feel.
Yes.
Oh, great.
The short answer is yes.
Okay, great. Well, I'll say as a closing comment from me then, I really appreciate the recommended policy that you've brought for us today and advancing the county's work so we do have consistency. I also really appreciate the improvements so that we are able to be more successful in enrolling and engaging more members of our community, particularly those who have been historically not represented or engaged. And I also, related to that, will note that from my own personal experience as an elected official just this year, some of you have heard me say previously that I've learned through the course of the first 6 months of the year that it isn't sufficient for me to just support equity most of the time, right? I have to do it all of the time. And with the initial meeting that we had with the Metro SHS Tri-County Planning Body, they made available to us a video, Segregated by Design, which is a short 10-minute video that brings to life the book, Color of Law, which I've not completed yet, okay? And that tells the story of the remedies that we in government need to implement. And that includes offering the compensation that this proposal helps enable. And I agree with the comments from Commissioner Fye and Commissioner Treese that for some members of our community, we do need to go further and do the work to remove barriers to engaging productively with government. So I very much support this policy recommendation as adopted. And if you haven't had the opportunity to watch that video, Segregated by Design, please check it out. It's very powerful. And helps us do the work that we need to do in stewards of our community as a county government in where we find ourselves in 2022 and beyond. So those are my comments. So I think you've got at least 3 of us at this stage who are interested in your bringing this draft policy forward for formal consideration. Are there any additional board questions or comments at this juncture? Okay, any items from staff to close? Nope. All righty then. Thank you very much, staff. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So at this juncture, per our agenda, we have a break for 15 minutes. It's just after 3 o'clock. And so after the break, we would be convening in executive session pursuant to ORS 192.660 sub 2 sub I for performance evaluation. How about if we take a break until 3:18, 3:20 if we need to. We do know that we stand a chance of losing Commissioner Treese at 4:10. And we all have the material that was emailed out to all of us on Friday, June 24th by myself. So do we have a motion for executive session as I read off? We have a motion from Commissioner Fye. We have a second from Commissioner Treese. All those in favor, please vote by raising your hand or saying no. Thank you, commissioners. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously 5-0. We'll see you on that other Zoom link at 3:18 or 3:20ish. There you go. Thank you.